Hello everyone. Welcome back to our online section of chapter discussion. We have to continue with the same chapter because we have done till importance of business finance and the sources of finance for our different types of business. Okay. Now today we are going to see regarding financial planning. Now what actually is financial planning? Financial planning is a process of framing financial policies for the purpose of estimating the capital requirement of any enterprise. Okay, in that you have to see what identify, or you have to find out, or you have to see the different sources of fund and their utilization, how you are going to raise the funds for the different enterprises. Okay, and how the funds are going to be utilized. In other words, it is a task of determining how a business organization will achieve its financial objectives. Okay, that means what? Financial planning is nothing but it is the way of finding out how the business organizations are going to achieve their financial objectives. Okay, that means what? How they are going to allocate the sources of means funds. Okay, and how they are going to utilize the fund means what? Allocation of fund as well as utilization of fund. This two basic elements are there which includes in what? Financial plannings. Okay, that means financial planning means what? To ensure that availability of fund. That means the basic purpose of financial planning is that to find out the suitable fund and funds which are going to be invested in the business, which are going to be utilized in meeting the day-to-day affairs of the business, which are going to be utilized to meet some known or unknown contingency. That means what? To ensure the availability of fund. This is what the financial planning is all about, and to avoid unnecessary raising of funds. See, requirement of fund, you have to make utilization, you have to find out the sources from where you are going to raise the fund. But overfunding, yes, in financial planning, overfunding is not required. You don't have to go for what? Overfunding. See, overfunding is not going to give you a good result in a long run. Okay, overfunding means what? You are utilizing more than your capacity. You are putting something more than your capacity. That is only going to increase your cost. That is not going to give you any kind of extra profit. So, in a financial planning, the financial planners should ensure that the fund requirements are properly analyzed, and as per the analysis of the fund requirement, the fund should be raised. That means no extra fund should be invested in the business. Now, if you talk about the features of financial planning, the first feature is the linkage between the organizational objectives and the financial structure. What actually is the organizational objective is? For what the business is being carried out? What are the objectives of the business? What are the motives of the business? These objectives and the financial structure should be a proper link. There should be a proper link between them. Apart from this, financial planning's feature is what? To determine the amount, source, and the time of raising fund. That means what actually the fund required, from where the fund is going to be raised, and how much the fund is going to be raised, and at what time the fund is going to be raised. So financial planning should always focus, the financial planner should always focus on what? The requirement of the fund, okay, the sources of fund, and the areas from where he is going to raise the fund, and appropriate time of raising the fund. Apart from this, next feature of financial planning is what? Financial planning should be dynamic and future oriented. See, no one knows what is going to happen in future. Future is totally unpredicted. You cannot predict the future. Future cannot be predicted. It is very difficult to predict the future. If we are in a business, we cannot become an astrologer and we can predict the future. No. So financial planning should always be dynamic. Dynamic in the sense, accordingly, you have to analyze the things in the future which is going to happen. It may not happen also, but taking the future into consideration, you have to bring alterations in your planning. Your planning should be dynamic. Dynamic means change oriented. That means from time to time, appropriate changes can be made. Then it should be comprehensive enough so that it covers all types of funds, all types of diverse fund. Your planning should not be that you will go for only borrowed fund, or are going to utilize your own fund. You are going to put your plowing back of profits. No, you have to be very comprehensive as a financial planner. You have to be very comprehensive to see that all the aspects of the fund, all the types of funds are taken into consideration while doing the financial planning for any organization. As I told you, financial planning is nothing but framing the financial policies for the purpose of estimating the capital requirement of an enterprise and to identify the sources of the fund and to utilize the funds in a most appropriate manner. So in this section, we are going to see that what are the major considerations to be taken, or what are the factors to be considered while formulating the financial plan. See, while formulating the financial plan, the following points should be taken into consideration. Number one, objectives of the business organization. That means the financial plan must be formulated keeping the short term as well as the long term objectives of the business organization. The principal objective of business is what? Is the effective utilization of fund, cost control, and profit maximization. That means effective utilization of fund, controlling of cost, and maximization of profit. So financial plan should be prepared in keeping in view the principal objectives of the firm. What are the principal objectives of the firm? What are the prior or principal objectives of the firm? The principal objective of any firm, whether small firm, big firm, small scale, large scale, okay. The principal objective or the basic objective or the main objective of any firm is what? To see that the fund is utilized properly, to see that there is a cost control measures, to see that the maximization of profit is possible. Then comes nature of business. Second thing to be taken into consideration is what? Nature of business. Yes, nature of business determines its financial needs. For example, capital intensive business. Capital intensive business means more dependency is on capital goods, machine, tools, implements like cement industry, or you can say iron and steel. They require more capital. There the requirement of capital is more in compared to labor intensive methods of production. That means in a business where capital intensive methods of production is there, in a business where capital intensiveness is more, there the requirement is capital is more. There the requirement to fund is more in compared to labor intensive business. So you have to see the nature of business. What is the nature of the business, whether it is a capital intensive business or labor intensive business. Then comes what? Contingency. Now contingency should be anticipated in advance and the financial plan be drafted to keep means a keen view to see that the contingency are met on time or not. See, contingency are the known or unknown facts. It may arise or it may not arise. Contingency are means some type of expenses, you can say, or some types of losses which may take place or which may not take place. In that case, you have to anticipate beforehand. You have to anticipate beforehand, and you have to sort out a proper planning of your fund so that if some contingency arises, in that case you can meet those contingency on time. Then is what? Risk factor. Yes, risk is one of the important consideration while formulating the financial plan. Risk is one of the most important factor. Most important element in a financial planning is taking consideration of the risk factor. So adequate balance should be maintained between the equity and debt. Debt means your borrowings, clear. And too much reliance on raising funds through equity may dilute the control. May dilute the control means that means you have to give more powers to all the shareholders. Whereas if you are taking a borrowed fund, There is less dilution of power. Because borrowed fund, they will just charge interest. But who are internal sources of fund? If you are raising your share capitals and all, the shareholders are going to increase, the number of receivers are going to increase. So risk factor has to be taken. Which is more risky? Raising the fund from own sources or borrowed sources? Then comes government policies. Yes, government policy and regulation impact the financial decisions of a business organization. For example, if bank reduces the interest rate, then the debt becomes cheaper, and if the bank increases the interest rate, the debt becomes costlier. Then comes flexibility. Yes, business environment is a dynamic in nature. So while formulating the financial plan, you must take into consideration the flexibility nature or a dynamic nature of the business, because from time to time the business is changing, and financial plan should be formulated in such a way that in case if there is any change in future, that change can be met properly. Okay, that change can be met properly. So the formulation of financial plan or formulating the financial plan, you have to take consideration of objectives of the business. You have to take into consideration the nature of the business. You have to take into consideration the risk factors. You have to take the consideration of government policies. And finally, you have to take into the consideration the flexibility. So now we are going to talk about the fixed capital. We are going to talk about the fixed capital. Okay, there are fixed capital. You have working capital in a business. Okay, now fixed capital. What is the fixed capital? Fixed capital is that part of the capital which is invested in the tangible assets such as land, building, furniture, machinery, fixtures. Okay, and fixed assets are purchased with the object of earning revenue directly or indirectly. That means in a business, you purchase the fixed asset so that the revenue can be generated directly or indirectly and not for the purpose of sale. Fixed assets are not purchased, or investment is not done in a fixed asset so that you're going to sell it. No. Or in other words, you can say fixed assets means fixed capital is invested in that part of the tangible assets which are going to give the benefit to the organization for a longer duration of time, like plant, machinery and all they run for a longer duration of time. The benefit derived, the revenue generated from them is for a longer duration of time. So according to some of the authors, okay, fixed capital is invested in the fixed or long run assets. Long run assets, that means the assets which are going to run for a longer duration of time, and the amount of fixed capital need, okay, therefore varies directly. It varies directly with the amount of fixed assets owned by the business or used by the business. How much fixed capital you are investing and how much fixed capital is being utilized. That means fixed assets. Whatever the fixed capital you put, that goes to the fixed assets. That means there is a direct proportion. If you are investing in the sense fixed capital 5 lakh, so fixed 5 lakh assets will also appear in the organization. Okay, so in nutshell, we can say fixed capital is that part of the capital which is invested in the assets which are going to give the benefit to the business organization for a longer duration of time. Fixed capital is directly proportional to the fixed assets of the business. Okay, so there are certain factors which are to be taken into consideration while determining the fixed capital requirement. The first is the nature of the business. As I told you earlier also, that means the requirement of fixed capital will be more if you are capital intensive business. If you are having a capital intensive business where manufacturing is the major concern in the business, there the requirement of fixed capital is more. Whereas in the case of trading business where you don't go for production of goods and services, okay, there the requirement of fixed capital is less. The requirement of fixed capital is more when you are manufacturing the goods, you are producing the goods. Okay, so the scale of operation, no doubt, larger the scale of operation is, the more will be the requirement of fixed capital. And when your scale of operation is small, the fixed capital requirement will also be what? Small. Technique of production, yes, capital intensive methods. If you're using more and more machine, more and more sophisticated tools and implement there, the fixed capital requirement will be more. And when you are using what? Labor intensive methods of production, you can rely with salaries and wages. No need of buying costly machines and all. There the fixed capital requirement is low. Mode of finance, yes, if finance facility like lease, etc. are easily available, then less fixed capital is required. That means you can borrow, you can take a lease. Okay, the requirement of fixed capital will be less because you are going to have those things on a lease basis. Lease basis means 99 years ownership you get. But if the lease facilities and all are not there, then you have to buy those fixed assets, and then you have to pay more for that, and for that you require what? Fixed capital. Business cycle, when there is a boom in the market, the business enterprise will invest more and more in the fixed capital. And when then there is a depression in the market, when the market is going down, then the business enterprises invest less in the fixed capital. Purchasing of intangible assets. Intangible assets are those assets which are on paper, okay, but physically they don't exist, like goodwill, patent, trademark. Okay, they require huge capital. Suppose I am to use the goodwill of some other concern, I have to pay a huge amount of money to them. That means what? Purchasing of any kind of intangible assets, the requirement of fixed capital is very high. So there are certain factors which are to be taken into consideration, okay, while determining the fixed capital requirement of a business. First, as I said, nature of the business. Secondly, I said what? Scale of operation. Then I said techniques of production, labor intensive or capital intensive. Then I said what? Mode of finance, what type of finance facilities you are going to avail. Then it comes what? Business cycle. When business cycle means what? Boom period or period of depression, and purchasing of intangible assets. These are the elements which are to be taken into consideration while determining the fixed capital requirement of a concern.